Welcome to Meer over Democratie, the Meer Democratie podcast, this time in English. For our second episode, I spoke with Clara Egger.
Yes, so I'm Clara Egger.
We spoke about direct democracy, how Clara came to love it, and what it can mean for Belgium.
Professionally, I'm an assistant professor of global governance at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And basically my research is about direct democracy institutions in the world, and in particular, what are the changes that happen when people are able to directly vote on foreign policy issues, such as, membership to the European Union, like trade agreements with other countries, this type of things. And since 1 year now, I've served as the member of the executive board of Democracy International, which is the largest coalition of organizations and people promoting direct democracy in the world. It's based in Cologne, but it's a very broad network. So in this capacity, I provide advice, I support the network with research, and we are publishing next week the first State of Direct Democracy report that explains a bit how it works in different countries and what are progresses and challenges about direct democracy. So we are publishing the first State of Direct Democracy report, which is actually a report reviewing all direct democracy institutions in the world, the progress and the challenges. So we are very excited about it. And I have also been involved since I'm now living in Belgium in debates about how to introduce direct democracy in Belgium in particular.
And how did you come about your interest in direct democracy?
That's a funny story, actually. So I'm French, so I did my studies and I grew up in France. And I have always been very interested in trying to increase the power of citizens, right? What they can do to change their life when they have an issue. And when I was in France, I got to realize that this is very difficult. So for example, small things, right? You're living in a neighborhood, you want to install a new playground for kids. You have to go through a lot of authorizations. There's very little that you can do without the consent of political authorities. So I got a bit frustrated, right? I was wondering, but why is that? Why is it that we have so little power to decide about our life? And I started to research how things are in other countries. This is at the time where I met Raoul, and Raoul at that time was working a lot on democratic institutions, right? How it works in different countries and what is the level of power citizens have in different countries. So he mentioned direct democracy, right? But for me, it was very abstract, right? Well, how does that concretely work? And it became extremely concrete when I moved to Geneva. My father is Swiss, but we had very little contact with Switzerland at that time. And there I saw what it creates to have people directly decide about the way they want to live their life, the way they want to organize society. So I would say, it was first realizing that we have little power, having a bit of a theoretical understanding of how it can be, and then really living what direct democracy is about in Switzerland. So this is how I got into that topic. And then in 2019, the Yellow Vest movement started in France and started to have direct democracy as a key demand. So at that time, the media, and especially the French media, I think it's better in Belgium, but the French media knew nothing about direct democracy and were really saying crazy stuff, right? Such as, oh, well, this is something from the far right and it never works. And this is something completely new. So together with Raoul and other friends, we decided to write a book, popular book, right? To explain what is direct democracy, where it is used, and try to also break a bit of the myth that are around this topic.
So you would say you came into contact through your direct experience?
Yes. And I can explain a bit maybe what direct experience mean, because it stays a bit abstract. When you live in Geneva or in Switzerland and in other places where direct democracy is promoted. So when you go to the market, for example, you see people collecting signatures for their proposal, right? So they come to you and say, oh, we have a new idea about, for example, a new policy on how we can make sure that young people have access to cultural centers, right? So you see really people active in promoting their ideas, collecting signatures. And in Switzerland, people vote at the national level 4 times a year and at the local level every month. So you can see like really decision being taken nearly on a daily basis. And that topic of deciding together being very prominent.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting to me, because I've never been to Switzerland, but I would say specifically the experience in Belgium is quite the opposite.
Yeah.
I know very little people who feel engaged with politics, and especially in Brussels, there's a feeling where you have little to no impact on what's happening. Even those who with power feel, I think, sometimes act like they cannot do anything. Yeah. So it's very encouraging that you tell me there's a place close by that has a very a different experience with these topics.
And there is a lot of what is particularly, I think, interesting in comparing Switzerland and Belgium, because sometimes, for other countries, it's difficult to take inspiration from the case of Switzerland in particular, because their political context is very different. But for Belgium, that's not the case, really. Both Switzerland and Belgium are relatively small countries, right, when you compare to Germany or to France. And they're also characterized by the same situation, having different national languages. So in Switzerland, you have 4 national languages: German, French, Romansh, and Italian. And also, a division along religions between, small villages in the Alps and big urban centers, such as in Belgium, Antwerp or Brussels. So there is a lot to compare in also showing how direct democracy helped building the Switzerland we know today. And something that people don't know a lot is that now we have the idea of Switzerland, right? A very peaceful country with calm people. But before direct democracy was introduced, people were really fighting each other, right? There were political conflict. The country was really on the edge of a civil war. People were fighting with each other because they were unable to agree on how to organize power. So somehow the situation was worse than it is in Belgium today. But direct democracy was a way of solving conflicts peacefully and organizing society in a country that is extremely diverse and where people have different interests, right? So I think it does speak to the situation we are experiencing in Belgium.
You spoke a bit before about thinking, since you came to Belgium, in how to move towards a system that involves more direct democracy. How would such a transition, what would it look like?
So basically, currently our main, how shall I put it, focus, especially with Meer Democratie, is to work on a law proposal, so propose a constitutional reform, because if you want to introduce direct democracy in Belgium, you have to change the constitution. The constitution is really the document that explains the rules of the political game, right? So if you want to give people new power they don't have, so which is the power to propose, write, initiate laws that now the government and the member of parliament have in Belgium, and to validate this law, right? So through a referendum, you have to change the constitution. So we are proposing a new constitutional change that allows basically people in Belgium to have the right to propose changes in the constitution and directly vote changes on the constitution. Right now in Belgium, this is it's not the easiest process to change the constitution, because basically you have to have first an agreement in the two chambers about the how like the number of articles that you want to change. So that we hear a bit currently in the current political campaigns. There are people saying we should change that article, we should change that article. So a member of parliament have to agree on a list, and this list, after the election, there are proposals to concretely change some articles. So it's a two-stage process, right? First, you have a list of articles that you open for revision. Then you have the elections, and then there has to be a majority agreeing on concretely changing some articles after the election. So it's rather complex, but this is why we decided to propose this new change right now, so that we hope to attract a bit of interest, right, from policymakers in Belgium. So that's one, I would say, way. And I think another way, which is also something a bit more maybe practical, would be, I think, to concretely experience what it is to organize a referendum in some municipalities, in some places. I was invited to TV from Brussels, and a member of the Parliament of Brussels was invited, and we discussed about it will speak to people living in Brussels, right? But this whole mobility plan, the fact that now we are redesigning, like some streets, whether they should be car free or whether circulation should be allowed. And this is a disastrous, I would say, process, right? Because people are asked to provide advice about how they would like their street to be organized, and then there is a decision that sometimes is very far away from what they advise. And policymakers don't always explain how they took decision, right? So you give a lot of advice, and then there is a decision that does not suit you, right? So at that time, in this TV interview, I told the member of parliament that there should be a referendum about it, that we should concretely vote on mobility plans. And that would give also us experience about how to use that, concrete experience, because as you said when we were discussing preparing this podcast, this is very abstract, but you can make it very concrete. So I would say there are two ways of going about introducing direct democracy in Belgium, which I think is a very important and powerful reform for our country. Could be law proposal, so really having something more abstract, you try to lobby member of parliament, or concretely organizing and showing people, okay, that can work. You can write law proposal and you can directly vote law proposals.
I was wondering, are there any current topics in the news where you feel like, oh, this would be a great example if you had a form of direct democracy, this issue would be handled in a better way?
I would say two things. There are many topics, but well, as you can see, in many countries, there have been a lot of protests from farmers, especially here in Brussels. We saw them a lot because of the institution, and I think the protests are really much bigger in countries where decisions are taken really far away from people. And a concrete effect of direct democracy is the fact that when people are they control the rule of the political game, right? They can make legislation, they can oppose legislation. You have also a much more stable political environment for people. And especially, I think, farmers complain about the fact that administrative procedures are becoming completely crazy, right? So what they need to do, and we all feel that, right? We all feel that the administration is requiring, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger in our life, but we don't see an increase in the quality of public services. If we had the ability to vote directly, we would really decide about what are necessary administrative procedures and what are things that we don't need. So there are many concrete examples. In many countries, people do decide directly about the type of constraints that are put, for example, on exploitations and so on. So that's one thing, right? One demand, having an administration that is at the service of people and not the other way around, right? That people they spend their life filling these procedures. And then there is this whole debate about the type of agricultural policy we want to for the future, especially considering environmental issues. And this is a very long-term decision we need to take, because this is something that if we change the way we produce food, then this is something that we need to take a decision that stay a bit in time so that we can see the effect of it in the long run. I think people in Belgium, and that's the case of many other countries in Europe, they are much more attached to, local agriculture, things that are produced locally, small scale farming, than this big exploitation that are also promoted by the EU policy. When people directly vote on this topic, this gives also stability to this type of decisions, because the majority of citizens, like the decision of the majority of citizens, changes much more slowly than political parties. Political parties, they can change, in like every 5 years, 4 years, 6 years, depending on the country. And this creates a lot of instability because they never want to commit to long-term rules, because they're like, I don't want to be the one changing the rules and being blamed for that, and I will not get any electoral gains out of it. So they're very reluctant to do that. And people are not, because people think about, their kids, new generations. We are much more we think long term, and our opinions change much more slowly than what, elected officials perceive or wants to activate. So I think if we were able to directly decide on the type of agricultural policy we want, the type of also financing we want to give to the farmer, the type of margins we want to allow big, agricultural supermarkets, corporations to have, we will not have that situation that we have right now. When people can't really influence directly make decisions directly, you see a lot of protests, but that's natural. I remember when I was in Switzerland, I was having some beers with some friends, and they were asking me about, how is say the system in Belgium working, right? So explain it to me. So I said, well, we elect member of parliament, and then they stay elected for a few years, and then there is new election, right? And then my friends would tell me, but what do you do if you're unhappy in between? And then I said, well, you go to the street, you try to contact your member of parliament, you protest, you sign petitions. And they were really surprised, right? They were looking at me like, but you can't do anything, right? So, and then they concluded saying, well, if I was living in Belgium, I would be in the streets each and every day. So it's not that, Swiss people are much calmer. It's just that if there is something they don't like, they have the possibility to change it. They don't need to spend a lot of time and energy mobilizing people and trying to get listened to by their elected official. They have this ability. And that you see, for example, I think the biggest effect is on agricultural policy. In Switzerland, when you go to any supermarkets, you have really the products that are locally produced are, signal. And there is this sense of that the agricultural policy is also fulfilling the need and the request of the people much more than what we have today in Belgium. So that would be a very concrete, I think, effect. Another very concrete effect, well, right now we speak a lot, and I think everywhere in Europe, right, about immigration policies. What are the rules? So what are the criteria we want to have to allow people to live in our country? Well, that's a political decision. Currently, what we see is that there are some, depends a bit on the country, right? But some type of professions are very protected and other are not. But this is a collective decision we have to take, What are the type of jobs that request immigration, that we need really people to come to help, to work? And what are the professions that we want to protect? Because, I don't know, these people, they can't really move away to change jobs, or they're already affected a lot by globalization. Again, discussions on immigration could be extremely peaceful and less caricatural than the one we have right now. And I think Belgium is a really open country we are proud to have like that many people from different cultures living in this country. And that could be reflected much more in the type of policy and in the type of debate we have. It would be really like a debate about, okay, how can we take decisions that respect human rights, respect the right to people that people have for mobility, but at the same time that consider the fact that in every society, some groups, and especially the poorest part of society, needs to be protected from the effect of globalization that is strong also on job competition. So I think it would be much more constructive. I think a last example, I mean, I have a kid who's in the eerste leerjaar. We have a problem with education in Belgium. We have a shortage of teachers. It is very difficult to replace teachers. So we have, for example, in the school of my kid, we have a wonderful director, but one of the teacher left and we have no one to replace her. So we have to find a solution. I think in Belgium, like also the fact that we have a lot of, people involved in like the democratic functioning of the school, we could have really an education policy that reflects our concern for the education of our children, right? And this concern is a bit absent, in my view, from the current political campaign. We speak of a lot of topics, but that really specific situation that leads some school to really face a shortage of teachers. We have a lot of strikes because teachers really try to influence policy making. Well, they would not need to do that if people would have the possibility to vote directly. You could have a union of teachers together with an association of parents proposing a way of making sure that our schools are staffed. And it could be about, many policies, right? It could be about increasing the salary of teacher to make also like the profession appealing for people. You name it, but this type of very concrete decisions we could take together, and we would not have to wait election or to be heard before elections to take that decision.
I think the teacher example is very interesting because I feel like, I wonder what your opinion is on this. A lot of topics in politics are very much putting connection to other topics. For example, with teachers, there is concrete proposals, like, for example, increasing wage or like certain protections. But when you look at the discourse in the media, these proposals get very politicized. Yeah. Do you feel like a form of direct democracy also can take a lot of these tensions around it out of it and polarize these issues a bit?
Yeah, I do think so. And it's not something that I say because I am convinced, right? I am an activist of direct democracy, but this is really based on research, right? Because something that has to be made clear, I think, is that direct democracy is really also about people writing and proposing a new law. So the idea, you have to come up with a solution, right? You have to be constructive. So when people do that, right, they have to think about, okay, what is it that I want to change? What are the consequences of this change? And when doing that, when drafting their law proposal, most of the time they consult a lot of associations that have a lot of expertise, right, on this topic, that they know also, like they know a bit about the impact of specific policies. And this is a strong, I think, asset of direct democracy, is that currently in Belgium we have a lot of, civil society organizations, associations. But the impact on policy making is not that strong, right? It depends on whether a politician is really willing to listen to them and feel that he or she will win votes with that decision. So when you have direct democracy, you remove that. I mean, everything a bit is political, right? When you design a policy, this is politics. But our representative system is really created in a way to change debates about policy, right? Concrete solutions, about very big ideological debates that people, know nothing about, that polarizes people a lot because you don't discuss really the solution that is proposed. You attack the other because you want to win votes about, his values or his ideas about the world. And then I think when having direct democracy, that could remove a lot of these tensions. And another example that we could give is really also about the concrete organizing of our country, right? And the relationship between the different communities. I think right now, the discussion we have and the opposition we have between, Wallonia and Flanders is caricatural. That's a caricature. That's really something that both political parties, they throw at each other because they are unable to listen to what the other wants. Whereas people in Belgium, they do relate to each other much more. I mean, we face the same. If you look especially at, this big survey that we do in social sciences about what people think, and people from Flanders and people from Wallonia are not so distant from each other. They do value the same thing, good quality education, good social services. So there could be a lot of bridges built from the people, and that would have also an effect that sometimes is a bit hard to understand. But when people control the political game, the behavior of politicians is different. Why? Because they always fear that if they take a back decision, there's going to be a referendum against them. And no one wants to lose a referendum. So when making a decision, they consult much more. They listen to each other, right? So I have the feeling, it's really funny because when you are in the street, you go to the market, I think everybody in Belgium is fed up about the fact that the politics in our country is blocked, right? We are unable to make decisions because political parties are unable to find a point of agreement. Mm-hmm. Well, if they would face the fact that if they don't find an agreement, there could be new elections. People could take decisions by themselves. Well, you will see that they will find agreements, point of agreements, much more quickly and easily than this is the case right now. Mm. And this is especially, I think, if you look at the history of countries that have been highly polarized, as mentioned, Switzerland, well, this is a concrete effect of direct democracy. A country that was on the edge of civil war is now one of the most well-functioning countries in the world. That's not because, Swiss people are particularly good. It's just because they found institutions and rule of the game that allow them to solve their conflicts.
Mm. When you were speaking, I was thinking about my experiences growing up around Antwerp. Yeah. Antwerp is a place where Flemish nationalism is very strong. Mm-hmm. And then specifically a right-wing variant of this. Yeah. The funny thing about growing up there and living around a lot of people who hold these very, very strong opinions is that most of them never, I think, in their lives have never met a Wallonian person. Yeah. Or they would... It's also a very white environment they live in. So they hold these strong opinions, but they are also in correlation with a lack of interaction with those people as they hold opinions. To me, it sounds very convincing, the fact that this culture of interaction and this system which forces people, especially people in power, to communicate and to listen to their constituency. It sounds very plausible to me that would take away some of these societal adversities.
Yeah, especially because, I mentioned the law proposal. So there is always, when you decide of the rules of direct democracy, you need to pay attention to little detail. So most of the time, direct democracy functions in this way. So you have someone or a group of people making a law proposal. And before it goes to a referendum, they have to collect signatures. And you have to find a number of signatures that is high enough so that the proposal is supported by a sufficient number of people, because you can't vote on, each and every day on everything. but that is not too high so that a minority can actually propose stuff, right? And what we proposed in our law proposal is a threshold that is very similar to the Swiss one, and that would require either people from Wallonia or people from Flanders to collect signatures from the other side. So they would have to present that proposal to others and build that connection. If not, the proposal will not be submitted to a referendum, right? It will be very hard. I mean, you could, but it's also, if you want to win the referendum, well, you need to take into account what other people think. Another possibility also that we included in our proposal is to include a somehow so-called double majority requirement that exists actually in Switzerland, which is that I discussed the number of signatures needed, but the other aspect is that you can also put criteria for the result of a referendum to be valid. So you can say, okay, the proposal is adopted if the proposal receives the majority of the vote in a referendum. That's the minimum, rule. But you can also have another criteria. And in our case, we propose a double majority, which is basically that you need not only the majority of votes in Belgium, but also the majority of geographical units in the country. So that you need to make sure that these votes are distributed in the different provinces of the country, right? Okay. That is the way it works in Switzerland. Why? Because something that I presented Swiss people as very peaceful, but something that pisses them off a lot often is the fact that in any country in Europe, what people think in large city centers is very different from what people think in the countryside. And I say that I come really from a very small village in France, so I know that's very concretely myself. And in Switzerland, the small villages in the Alps were very afraid of having their policy dictated by people living in Zurich, in Geneva, that are very different. So they have this also double majority, right? So the idea that you need to take into account what people in small communes think. And that's something we also propose for Belgium, to also make sure that the result of the referendum is not only representative of the wish of the majority of people in the country, but also of the different, groups making up that country at the geographical level, right?
Yeah, that would also prevent a situation like in Great Britain, where there was big discrepancies in the countries of the United Kingdom. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you see, look now. Brexit is a very good example about what is not direct democracy, because even if British people would have proposed exiting the European Union, they would have done so very differently, because in direct democracy, a question is never about do you want to stay or do you want to leave? Because you have to write a law proposal. So you have to tell your fellow citizens, okay, we want to get out of this policy in the EU in this way, in this way, in this way, and this will work like that. And you have to convince people that this is a good decision. That happened in a lot of countries. So Ireland, for example, is an example. People can't initiate laws directly, but they can vote on EU treaties. So people in Ireland have voted a lot. They have rejected a lot of treaties, accepted afterwards. And they are in Europe, I think, the country with the highest level of support for the EU. Why? Because each time there is a new decision to be taken, a new treaty to be adopted, well, you always have to think about, okay, but what can we do to convince the people of Ireland that this is a good decision for them? So they have a lot of, special policies, and they're very happy with the EU, right? And the way the debate is framed is very different than the Brexit debate, right? They debate on specific points in the EU treaty. In the case of Brexit, I mean, it was, do you want to stay or to leave? It was also a referendum that was made for purely party politics reason, right? The Conservative Party was really willing to, it was really an internal party. All the parties campaign like saying, we need to stay, we need to stay. And it's what we call a plebiscite, right? And in the end, the results was surprising for everybody. And as you said, right, people in Scotland and Northern Ireland, they didn't want to leave. And now we have a crisis in Scotland. Because now political parties in Scotland are saying, okay, well, look, if you are unable to listen to us, we may rather leave. And now this is a real question that they have, is shall we call for a referendum to be independent? So that also shows what is the big difference, because sometimes the debate in Belgium is poorly understood as a debate about referendums. But referendums in themselves, they can be bad for democracy or they can be very good. It depends on how they are designed. If by referendums we mean that a political party can propose a referendum tomorrow when it will, that's bad. But if it is that, okay, some decisions can't be taken without the consent of the people, which is what we call mandatory referendums, so the political elite can't control these referendums, or that people can actually initiate referendum themselves, this is good. So I think we should also get out of a debate in Belgium, which is about, okay, whether referendums are good or not. We need to pass this stage, right? It's really about, okay, what are the good referendums that could allow people to could have positive effects on our democratic system? And we know, I mean, we're in a luxury position if we compare to what was the case maybe even 1 century ago. Now we have a lot of research, a lot of information coming from other countries, so we know what works and what doesn't work. And especially, I think, right now in Belgium, and especially in Brussels, there is this focus on citizen assembly, saying, oh, that's a good way, like this citizen assembly, it's a remedy for democracy. Well, depends on what you want to achieve. If you want to make decisions more representative, that could be a good option. But I don't think we have a representation problem in Belgium. I think that actually, I think Belgium is one of the countries in Europe where really like the member of parliament's elected officials are very diverse and they represent more or less well the population. What we have, the problem we have in Belgium is a decision problem. People don't decide. And in citizen assembly, they don't decide. So that doesn't solve the power question, the fact that we all feel, as you were saying, that decisions are taken away from us, that we don't control. I think the sentence I heard the most since I arrived in Belgium is that we have no control over the whole thing. Yeah. We don't understand what's going on. How can it be that, and even people like working in administration, and this is something I love about Belgium, I think we all have this awareness that, okay, this doesn't work, let's find a practical solution, because this really doesn't work. So I think we are all aware of that, and citizen assembly, they will not solve this. Yeah. Giving power to people will solve that.
I think with something, a system like that, there's also the danger, which I saw a few times in the Netherlands, where they organize like citizen assemblies and they listen to the people and then they ignore what comes out of it completely, which feels frankly insulting.
Yeah, for sure. Because you spend a lot of time working on this topic, proposing stuff, and in the end, it's policymakers deciding. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that also feels, and that creates, we need to be very cautious about that, is that this creates a lot of frustration and a lot of dissatisfaction with democracy. Across the board in Europe, the request is very clear. When you ask people about what is the type of democratic reform they want, direct democracy comes first. Belgium is no exception. So if you refuse giving new rights to people, I mean, you have to also explain why you do that. And we are in a situation, when I was researching direct democracy, I did also a lot of research about the type of debates that we had in the past when, we decided, for example, to give male the right to vote and then women. We're in the exact same situation. The type of arguments provided are exactly the same, oh, this is dangerous for freedoms. People are not competent enough. each time there is a demand for new political rights, the reaction is always to say this is not the right moment, this is dangerous, people are unable to make decisions. And that has been the case already in the past. And now, I mean, we are very happy with the fact that women vote. We think it's, well, for us, it looks like completely crazy, the fact that women were not allowed to vote in the past. So I sincerely hope that in a few years, we will think, but how could have we lived without direct democracy? This is working so well, right? But we are right now in the situation where we have to push a bit for it because, yeah, especially elected officials are not willing to share their power.
So clearly, a lot to be done still. But Clara described as a promising way forward, even for Belgium. Yeah, let's hope we can take some of that part.
Yeah.
With this, I think I would like to thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, David.